Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating dynamic that literally powers the global economy, yet it happens completely out of sight. In fact, it's probably happening right inside your own home. We're going to uncover how something as seemingly simple as cleaning a house or minding a child is actually the hidden bedrock of our entire international system. Okay, let's dive right into this. Is scrubbing a tub really an act of international politics? I mean, usually when we think of international relations, we picture war rooms, UN summits, or stock trading floors, right? We rarely look at the laundry room or the kitchen sink as a theater of global power. But if we look a little closer, that assumption gets flipped completely on its head. It turns out the globalized economy actually relies heavily on exactly who scrubs the tub and under what conditions. To really grasp the sheer scale of this, just think about this number: 53 million. According to a landmark report by the International Labor Organization, that is the estimated number of domestic workers functioning in the globalized economy today. 53 million. That's an absolutely staggering workforce. We aren't just talking about a few local helpers here. We're talking about a massive, absolutely vital labor force that frequently crosses international borders just to keep the world running. And when you look at exactly who makes up that massive number, a sweeping 83% are women. Now, this feminization of labor, it's definitely not a coincidence. It's a deeply ingrained political and economic reality. Because this work is traditionally viewed as quote-unquote women's work, it's systemically undervalued, underpaid, and made basically invisible compared to male-dominated industries like construction or manufacturing. Section 1. The invisible global workforce. To truly wrap our heads around this, we need to zoom out a bit. There's this fascinating bilateral dependency that literally ties nations together. On one side, you've got exporting countries like the Philippines or Sri Lanka, right? Their governments actively rely on the remittances these women send back home to keep their national economies afloat and pay off foreign debts. And on the flip side, you have importing countries, places like Qatar, Malaysia, or Chile, who bring in domestic workers because having a large middle class that can afford immigrant domestic help is often viewed as a sign of national modernity. So both governments have a massive political stake in maintaining this constant flow of cheap, feminized labor. Section 2. The double-day reality. Let's shift gears from the macroeconomics of nations down to the micro level of the household. So as more middle-class women around the world have entered the professional workforce, they are still, by and large, expected to handle the unpaid housework and childcare at home. Because society and workplaces haven't fully adapted, these women face this totally impossible superwoman dilemma. Rather than governments providing public childcare or men taking on an equal share of household chores, this dilemma is often solved privately. Middle-class women end up hiring immigrant or working-class women to take over those domestic duties. Now, what's really interesting about this is when you ground these big ideas in a real human experience. Take the story of Teresa, a Filipino woman who migrated to Qatar. Her contract promised $400 a month, plus room and board. Sounds like a pretty safe bet to support her family, right? But her actual reality? Her employer only paid her $250, fed her a single meal of leftovers every day, and demanded she work 7 days a week across multiple households. And because of restrictive migrant laws, she couldn't legally quit. She was completely trapped. Contrast Teresa's live-in experience with Rosa's story. Rosa is an undocumented Mexican worker in San Diego. 5 days a week, she commutes to clean the home of a middle-class pharmacist, which basically allows her employer to go out and pursue a career. Yet, while Rosa cares for her employer's family, Rosa's own child is watched by her undocumented mother. It's like this entire cascading chain of marginalized women picking up the domestic responsibilities of women above them on the economic ladder. Section 3. Pillars of exploitation. So how does this system actually persist? While this global vulnerability isn't accidental, it's actively constructed. There's an entire architecture of exploitation propping this up. First off, just treating the job as stereotypical women's work instantly devalues it. Then, governments intentionally keep these women's visas precarious, tying their legal status directly to their employers. Lawmakers actively exempt domestic workers from standard minimum wage and overtime laws. And perhaps the most insidious pillar of all is the myth that the worker is quote-unquote just like family. By treating the home as a private family sphere rather than a real workplace, employers and governments can completely ignore standard labor rights. You might be wondering, why don't they just unionize? Well, solidarity is never automatic. The barriers to organizing are just immense. Domestic workers are physically isolated behind the closed doors of private homes. They face vast language and cultural barriers. And crucially, there's this incredibly awkward power dynamic at play because the employers are very often other women. All of this makes building a unified political movement incredibly difficult. Section 4. Domestic workers fight back. Let's move to see how this builds, because despite those massive hurdles, this narrative shifts to a truly remarkable story of grassroots and transnational resistance over time. It started with small seeds, like a Sri Lankan activist boldly speaking out at a UN conference in Nairobi back in 1985. Fast forward to 2005 in Hong Kong, where migrant workers used a brilliant strategy called consulate hopping, literally driving buses from one consulate to another to publicly shame the governments complicit in their exploitation. This grassroots momentum directly paved the way for a historic victory in Geneva in 2011. To actually achieve this, activists had to fundamentally reframe their public identity. They stopped allowing themselves to be dismissed as just maids. Instead, they demanded to be seen as workers, as immigrants, and as women being denied basic human rights. By widening their political lens, they finally gained powerful allies in established labor unions, human rights organizations, and civil rights groups who had previously ignored them. It was a real game changer. And all of this culminated in the International Labor Organization formally adopting Convention 189. For the first time in history, an international treaty recognized domestic workers as real laborers, deserving of real rights. This included the formal right to organize, minimum wage protections, a mandatory 24-hour rest period each week, and, critically for migrants, the right to keep their own passports rather than surrendering them to employers. It was an absolute monumental paradigm shift. Section 5. The personal is international. Now we can connect these intimate, personal stories directly back to the macro mechanics of global politics. So the crucial point is that the international is personal. It means that governments and global markets don't just rely on treaties and trade agreements. They fundamentally rely on the deliberate manipulation of allegedly private domestic relationships to maintain global capitalism, to build skyscrapers in the Gulf, to keep hospitals staffed in the West. The system requires a cheap, easily controlled supply of feminized labor, scrubbing the tubs and minding the children behind closed doors. To really bring this home, imagine Teresa, the worker who escaped Qatar, hosting a workshop in Manila. Let's say she invites a Honduran banana worker, a Bangladeshi garment worker, Rosa the cleaner, Rosa's American employer, and a diplomat's wife. If you put all these incredibly diverse women in a single room, they'd quickly realize that their seemingly separate political struggles entirely overlap. The global production of bananas, clothing, and international diplomacy all function precisely because of the unpaid or severely underpaid domestic labor propping them up. Which leaves us with this final thought. The grand stage of international politics extends directly into our living rooms and our kitchens. So if the entire globalized economy essentially depends on who is scrubbing the tub, it forces us to look around and ask, who is scrubbing yours? And what global systems are you participating in to make that happen? Thank you for joining us for this explainer. Keep questioning the invisible systems around you, and we'll see you next time.